Have you ever built a life and then realized you couldn't feel it anymore? That's where it started for me. Not with a tragedy, not with some dramatic fall from grace. Just a quiet, unbearable stillness. Everything looked right from the outside. Career, stability, the usual boxes checked. But inside, it felt like I was living someone else's story. It's a strange kind of panic, not loud, not violent. Just this nagging sense that you're drifting inside your own life. You wake up, pour the same coffee, walk the same path, smile at the same people, and yet you wonder, how did I end up here? And why can't I feel it anymore? There was no explosion, no turning point, just a slow, suffocating fog, like trying to breathe through plastic wrap. And I almost convinced myself I was the only one. But then I found the data. Studies across 145 countries show a global dip in happiness that bottoms out in our 40s. It's called the U-shaped curve of well-being. We start hopeful, we build, we climb, and then, somewhere around midlife, it all flattens. Even people with careers, families, and so-called success report the same thing, a vague emptiness they can't explain. So no, it's not just you, it's not just me, it's human, statistically human, and still we don't talk about it. Instead, we joke. We call it a midlife crisis, like it's some punchline involving convertibles and gym memberships and bad decisions. We make it small so we don't have to admit it's actually huge. Because the truth is, this isn't about getting old, it's about getting honest. I remember reading a line that stopped me cold. Midway upon the journey of our life, I found myself within a forest dark, for the straightforward path had been lost. Dante wrote that 7 centuries ago, and still, it felt like he had written it for me, like he knew. That's what makes this moment so unsettling. It doesn't feel like failure, it feels like silence, like your life has gone off script and nobody noticed, including you. And here's the trap. Everything around you tells you to keep going, push harder, stay productive, be grateful, but you can't outrun emptiness. It catches you in traffic, in the shower, in the 2 a.m. stillness when everyone else is asleep and your soul is screaming quietly. That's when I realized something important. This isn't a breakdown, it's a message. A midlife unraveling isn't a malfunction, it's a sacred invitation. The question is, are you going to answer it? Here's the lie we've been sold. That success equals satisfaction, that if you check all the right boxes, job, relationship, status, money, you'll unlock some permanent sense of peace. But what happens when you do all that, and it still doesn't feel like enough? That's the part no one prepares you for. You spend decades building, achieving, proving, and then one day you look around and ask yourself a terrifying question. What if I built this whole thing on the wrong foundation? I had a job people respected, I had a life that looked good on paper, but inside I was starving, not for more, but for meaning. I kept thinking, maybe I just need a break, a vacation, a new challenge. But underneath that noise was a much deeper truth. None of this was working anymore, not because it was broken, but because I had outgrown it. There's a line from Carl Jung that hit me harder than I expected. Thoroughly unprepared, we take the step into the afternoon of life, with the false assumption that our truths and ideals will serve us as they did in the morning. That was it, right there. The values that got me here, ambition, control, approval, they weren't bad, but they were borrowed. Built for a younger version of me that no longer existed, and no one tells you how to grieve that, because that's what it is. A grief for the person you were, the roles you played, the dream you chased, the energy you once had, the future you assumed was coming. Jung called this stage individuation, the turning point where you stop building your identity for the world and start discovering who you really are beneath it all. And here's the part that shook me. Life really begins at 40. Up until then, you are just doing research. Research, that line changed everything. What if all the striving wasn't wasted? What if it was preparation? What if everything I thought was a detour was actually a dot in a pattern I hadn't learned to connect yet? That's when the shame started to lift. I wasn't failing, I was transitioning from the first half of life, the building half, to the second half, the becoming half. And when I looked around, I saw I wasn't alone. The average age of the most successful startup founders, 45. More than 80% of Gen X workers have considered a career change after 40. People don't reinvent at midlife because they failed. They reinvent because they finally have enough experience to know what matters. But there's one story that stayed with me more than any stat. A man spent 20 years working in IT. Same desk, same routine. Every morning he'd pull into the parking lot, sip his coffee, stare at the front door and feel nothing. One day he parked, sat there for 45 minutes and drove away. He never went back. Today he runs a small used bookstore in his hometown. Doesn't make half of what he used to, but he says he's never been richer. His words, I finally feel like I'm not hiding from myself. That was it. That was the mirror. Sometimes success isn't the thing that saves us. Sometimes it's the thing we have to walk away from to be free. And that's not failure. That's awakening. When everything familiar falls away, you begin to hear things you forgot were ever there. Not the noise of deadlines or notifications, but the quiet voice that's been buried beneath them, the one that whispers, there's more than this. That voice had been calling to me for years. I just didn't know how to listen. I didn't know how to be still long enough to hear it. Then I came across a story that cut through the fog. A woman named Jane. Her life had collapsed like a house with termite-ridden beams. Marriage ended, career crumbled. She said, it felt like my identity had slipped out the back door and left no forwarding address. So, in a moment of exhaustion and instinct, she booked a ticket to the Gobi Desert. Not for enlightenment, not to find herself, but because she needed to feel something real, something raw. She described lying on the cold ground beneath an impossible sky of stars. No roof, no mirrors, no one to perform for, just silence. And there, with nothing left to protect, she cried. Not out of despair, but because she had finally stopped pretending. Her words haunted me. I went to the most barren place I could find, and it gave me back my fullness. That's what midlife does. It strips, it burns, it leaves you exposed to the question you've been avoiding. Who am I really when there's no role left to play? We lose ourselves in layers, a compromise here, a sacrifice there, a smile we wear too long. By the time we reach our 40s or 50s, we're walking around wearing masks we forgot weren't our faces. But the truth doesn't stay buried forever. It waits. And if you're lucky or broken enough, you'll finally get quiet enough to hear it calling back. That's what started happening to me. Not a grand awakening, just a slow rediscovery. A sentence that felt like mine. A melody I hadn't hummed since childhood. A strange sense of peace in moments I used to rush through. I remember sitting with a notebook, unsure what to write. So I asked a question. What parts of me have I left behind? And the answers came softly, the part that used to draw without needing to be good, the part that found joy in helping someone else shine, the part that was content being seen without being impressive. They weren't gone, just waiting. It's funny. Our culture talks about reinvention like it's a branding strategy, a pivot, a glow-up. But real reinvention, it's remembering, not creating someone new, but recovering someone true. That's why Jane's story hit so hard. It wasn't about escape, it was about excavation, because the version of yourself that was buried under expectations and survival, she's still there, he's still there, you're still there. You just have to go quiet enough, deep enough to meet yourself again. And sometimes that meeting doesn't happen in a desert, sometimes it happens in the middle of a Thursday in your car, parked outside a job you don't want to walk into anymore. Sometimes it happens at 3 a.m. staring at the ceiling when the silence is louder than your own heartbeat. And sometimes it happens in the mirror, not the one in your bathroom, the one in your spirit, the one that doesn't care about your resume or your reputation, the one that asks, are you ready to come home? There's a moment in every story where the old world burns, where the tools that once helped you survive now keep you stuck, where holding on hurts more than letting go. Midlife is that moment, and here's what makes it brutal. You don't always realize what's burning until it's already gone. I thought I was just tired, burnt out, in need of a vacation. But no amount of rest could fix the restlessness. What I needed wasn't sleep, it was truth. I kept trying to patch the roof, but the foundation had cracked. Then I read a word I'd never heard before, metanoia. It means a profound shift of mind, a spiritual turning, not just thinking differently, but being remade from the inside out. That's what this season really is. It's not a midlife crisis, it's metanoia. And the fire, it's necessary, not to destroy, but to reveal. Because what burns away in midlife isn't just clutter, it's illusion. The illusion that approval equals worth, that busyness equals meaning, that certainty equals safety. I lost all of those and found peace on the other side. There's a line from Rumi that finally made sense to me. The wound is the place where the light enters you. That used to feel poetic. Now it feels surgical, because when the pain cuts deep enough, it carves out space for the light to get in. And I don't say that lightly. I know how heavy this can feel. I've sat in rooms where people whispered about ending it all. I've seen men cry in parking lots because they didn't know who they were without the job. I've watched women stare at empty nests and wonder, now what? This isn't just emotional, it's existential. And if that's you, if you're there, I want you to hear this. You are not broken, you are becoming. The fire that's taking your certainty is also freeing your soul, because on the other side of what you thought was the end is something softer, something slower, something sacred. I remember whispering to myself one night, I can't go back, and not because I had arrived, but because I had outgrown the person who lived in that old story. That was the night I stopped trying to rebuild what burned, and started asking, what wants to be built now? Carl Jung called it the afternoon of life. He warned that if we enter it clinging to the rules of the morning, ambition, ego, appearance, we will suffer. But if we let those burn, if we open ourselves to change, something extraordinary can begin. Life begins at 40, he said, not because we've figured it all out, but because we finally become brave enough to ask better questions. Not for them, not for likes or status or legacy, but for me, not from fear, but from truth. And that's when it happened. The shift. I stopped chasing the life I was told to want and started listening for the life that was already calling me. It didn't scream, it whispered, but I was finally quiet enough to hear it. After the fire, there was nothing left to fix, and strangely nothing left to fear, just the soft hum of stillness. A kind of spiritual hush I hadn't felt since I was a child, lying in a dark room, listening to the sound of my own breath. That's when I realized what I'd been running from wasn't failure, it was silence. Because silence is where the real questions live, and I wasn't sure I was ready for them, but they came anyway, not like a storm, like a whisper. What do you miss that you told yourself didn't matter anymore? When did you stop being curious? What do you do when no one's watching that makes you feel most alive? Not all questions have answers, but they have directions. And direction is everything. That's when I came across a concept from Japan, ikigai. It means reason for being, but it's more than that. It's the center point, the overlap between what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can offer. I didn't turn it into a life plan, I turned it into a listening practice. I drew 4 circles in my notebook, sat in a cafe with a pen in my hand, and no expectations, and I asked, what do I love, even if I'm not great at it? What do I do well, even if it doesn't feel big? Where do I see pain in the world I can soothe, even just a little? And what surprised me was how simple the answers were, helping someone find their voice. Making something that didn't exist the day before, being fully present with someone who's unraveling. It wasn't a revelation, it was a remembering. That's when it hit me, purpose doesn't arrive, it emerges, slowly, quietly, in the space you create for it. I started paying attention to the things I said yes to that lit me up, to the things I said yes to that left me drained. I kept a list, not of goals, but of clues, little glimmers of truth I hadn't made time to notice. That's how I found it, not purpose, but direction. And it was enough, because purpose isn't a finish line, it's a feeling. It's the way your body relaxes when you're in alignment. It's the thing you'd do if money didn't matter and time wasn't running out. It's the quiet joy of becoming someone you like. I heard a story once about a retired janitor who started volunteering at a children's hospital. He wasn't a counselor, he wasn't a doctor. He just sat with scared kids and made balloon animals. And when someone asked him why he did it, he said, because when I'm here, I remember that I matter. That's what purpose is. It's not glory, it's not even legacy. It's presence. You can't chase it, you have to notice it. And when you do, something profound shifts. You stop performing, you stop waiting, you stop needing your life to look impressive, and start asking if it feels honest. And that's when something extraordinary begins. You stop chasing who you think you should be, and you start becoming who you already are. For most of my life, I thought it would feel different, that by this point, this age, this stage, I'd have arrived somewhere, a fixed destination, a clarity that didn't flicker. Instead, I found something else, something quieter, something real. I found the courage to begin again. Midlife isn't the middle of the book, it's the end of one story and the quiet start of another. A second beginning not built on ambition but on authenticity. And here's the truth that caught me off guard. You don't need a breakdown to earn a breakthrough. You just need to be willing to ask yourself the questions you've been avoiding. Who am I becoming? What do I want the rest of this life to feel like, not just look like? What parts of me have waited patiently for permission to breathe? This isn't about reinvention, it's about resurrection, because you're not too late, you're not behind, you're not broken. You're being invited into something deeper. This is the threshold Jung wrote about, not a collapse but a crossing. The start of the journey inward, the second act, not of decline, but of integration. Because if the first half of life is research, the second is revelation. And life doesn't just begin at 40, it deepens, sharpens, and expands if we let it. The data says happiness starts to rise again in our 50s. That most people who struggle in midlife find greater peace later, not because life gets easier, but because they let go of needing to impress anyone. And I believe that, because I've lived it. I've watched people walk away from lives that looked perfect, not because they were failures, but because they were ready to tell the truth. I've seen people in their 60s pick up brushes and paint for the first time in decades, not because they had something to prove, but because they finally stopped apologizing for what they loved. I've seen a man turn grief into a foundation that's now helping thousands, a woman build a community for single mothers after her own story was dismissed. I've seen lives set on fire by purpose, not through grand gestures, but through daily honesty. This is the second half of your life, and it's not a decline, it's a deepening, not a return to youth, but a return to meaning. So here's what I'll say to you, the one watching, the one listening, the one wondering if it's too late. It's not. This is your moment to start again, to turn inward, to reclaim the parts of you that got lost in the noise. You don't need a 5-year plan. You just need a first step. And maybe that step is this video. Maybe it's closing your eyes right now and asking, what truth have I been postponing? If something in this spoke to you, tell me. Leave a comment. Tell someone else. Don't keep it to yourself. There's someone else out there who's walking through the same fog, wondering if they're the only one. Send this to them. Remind them what Carl Jung knew all along, that the path isn't lost. It's just beginning. Life begins at 40. If you're willing to walk into the fire and listen to what your soul has been trying to say.